Greetings, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so glad you're here. Thanks for tuning in. Tonight, we'll be finishing the book Black Bourgeoisie by E. Franklin Frazier, Part 10, starting on page 176, Behind the Masks.
Greetings. My name is the Revolutionary Matron, and my show is called The Learning Curve. I broadcast on a network called KWAZ Radio. There are other hosts on the network I'd like you to meet.
Greetings, everyone. This is Koku from the Bitter Medicine Podcast, inviting you to tune in to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the Pro-Black Perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
This is D Webb with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed here belong solely to the respondent, and they do not necessarily reflect any broadcast networks, affiliates, nor sponsors. The Learning Curve is a broadcast created for the benefit of my global community. Black is a consciousness. Content is being used for our commentary, research, criticism, education, scholarship, teaching, preaching, and news reporting. No copyright infringement is intended. I will make enunciation mistakes. I will give you my opinion about the information. And if you ever ask, I will send you my source.
Behind the Masks. Since the Black bourgeoisie live largely in a world of make-believe, the masks which they wear to play their role, their sorry roles, conceal the feelings of inferiority and of insecurity and the frustrations that haunt their inner lives. Despite their attempts to escape from real identification with the masses of Negroes, they cannot escape the mark of oppression any more than their less favored kinsmen. In attempting to escape identification with the Black masses, they have developed a self-hatred that reveals itself in their deprecation of the physical and social characteristics of Negroes. So they talk bad about themselves. Likewise, their feelings of inferiority and security are revealed in their pathological struggle for status within the isolated world and craving for recognition in the white world. So they're starving for attention, almost to the point of being obsessed with it. Their escape into a world of make-believe with its sham society leaves them with feelings of emptiness and a futility which causes them to constantly seek an escape in new delusions. The mark of oppression. There is an attempt on the part of the parents in middle-class families to shield their children against racial discrimination and the contempt of whites for colored people. Sometimes the parents go to fantastic extremes, such as prohibiting the use of the words Negro or colored in the presence of their children. They sometimes try to prevent their children from knowing that they cannot enter restaurants or other public places because they are Negroes, or even that the schools they attend are segregated schools for Negroes. Despite such efforts to insulate their children against the hostile white world, the children of the Black bourgeoisie cannot escape the mark of oppression. This is strikingly revealed in the statement of a 17-year-old middle-class Negro youth. When asked if he felt inferior in the presence of white people, he gave the following answer, which was somewhat unusual for its frankness, but typical of the attitude of the Black bourgeoisie. Offhand, I'd say no, but actually knowing all these things that are thrown up to you about white people being superior, that they look more or less down upon all Negroes, that we have to look to them for everything we get, that they'd rather think of us as mice than men. I don't believe I or any other Negro can help but feel inferior. My father says that it isn't so, that we only feel inferior to those whom we feel are superior. But I don't believe we can feel otherwise. Around white people, until I know them a while, I definitely feel out of place. Once I played a ping pong match with a white boy whose play I wasn't as good as mine, whose play I know wasn't as good as mine. And boys, he managed to beat me with ease. But I just couldn't get it out of my mind that I was playing a white boy, sort of an Indian sign on me, you know? The statement of this youth reveals how deep-seated is the feeling of inferiority, from which even the most favored elements among Negroes cannot escape. However, much some however much some middle-class Negroes may seek to soothe their feeling of inferiority in an attitude which they often express in adage, it is better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. They are conscious of their inferior status in American society. They may say, as did a bewildered middle-class youth, that they are proud of being a Negro or proud of being a member of the upper stratum in the Negro community and feel sorry for the Negro masses stuck in the mud, but they often confess, as did this youth. However, knowing that there are difficulties that confront us all as Negroes, if I could be born again and had my choice, I'd really want to be a white boy. I mean, white or my same color, providing I could occupy the same racial and economic level I now enjoy. I am glad I am this color. I'm frequently taken for a foreigner. I couldn't care, I wouldn't care to be lighter or darker and be a Negro. I am the darkest one in the family due to my constant outdoor activities. I realize, of course, that there are places where I can't go despite my family or money just because I happen to be a Negro. With my present education, family background, and so forth, if I was only white, I could go places in life. A white face holds supreme over a black one despite its economic and social status. Frankly, it leaves me bewildered. Not all middle-class Negroes consciously desire, as this youth, to be white in order to escape from their feelings of inferiority. In fact, the majority of middle-class Negroes would deny having the desire to be white, since this would be an admission of their feeling of inferiority. Within an intimate circle of friends, some middle-class Negroes may admit that they desire to be white, but not publicly. Publicly, they would deny any such wish. The Black bourgeoisie constantly boast of their pride in their identification as Negroes, but when one studies the attitude of this class in regard to the physical traits or social characteristics of Negroes, it becomes clear that the Black bourgeoisie do not really wish to be identified as Negroes. Insecurities and frustrations. Since the Black bourgeoisie cannot escape identification with Negroes, they experience certain feelings of insecurity because of their feelings of inferiority. Their feelings of inferiority is revealed in their fear of competition with whites. There is first a fear of competition with whites for jobs, notwithstanding the fact that middle class Negroes are the most vociferous in demanding the right to compete on equal terms with whites. Many of them still fear such competition. They prefer the security afforded by their monopoly in certain occupations within the segregated Negro community. For example, middle class Negroes demand that the two Negro medical schools be reserved for Negro students and that a quota be set for white students, though Negro students are admitted to white medical schools. Since the Supreme Court of the United States has ruled against segregated public schools, many Negro teachers, even those who are well prepared, fear that they cannot compete with whites for teaching positions. Although this fear stems principally from a feeling of inferiority, which is experienced generally in Negroes, it has other causes. The majority of the Black bourgeoisie fear competition with whites partly because such competition would mean that whites were taking them seriously, and consequently, they would have to assume a more serious and responsible attitude towards their work. Middle class Negroes, who are notorious for their inefficiency in the management of various Negro institutions, excuse their inefficiency on the grounds that Negroes are a young race and therefore will require time to attain the efficiency of the white man. The writer has heard a Negro college president who has constantly demanded that Negroes have equality in American life declare before white people in extenuation of the shortcomings of his own administration that Negroes were a child race and they had to crawl before they could walk. Such declarations, while flattering to whites, are revealing in that they manifest the Black bourgeoisie's contempt for the Negro masses while excusing its own deficiencies by attributing them to the latter. So they only identify with Black people when it's expedient for them to make an excuse. Yet it is clear that the Black workers who must gain in gain a living in a white man's mill or factory or in competition with white workers cannot offer any such excuse for his inefficiency. The fear of competition with whites is probably responsible for the Black bourgeoisie's fear of competence and first-rate performance within its own ranks. When a Negro is competent and insists upon first-rate work, it appears to this class that he is trying to be a white man, or that he is insisting that Negroes measure up to white standards. This is especially true where the approval of whites is taken as a mark of competence and first-rate performance. In such cases, the Black bourgeoisie revealed their ambivalent attitudes toward the white world. They slavishly accept the estimate which almost any white man places upon a Negro or his work. But at the same time, they fear and reject white standards. For example, when a group of Negro doctors were being shown the modern equipment and techniques of a white clinic, one of them remarked to a Negro professor in a medical school, "This is the white man's medicine. I never bother with it, and I still make $30,000 a year." Negroes who adopt the standards of the white world create among the Black bourgeoisie a feeling of insecurity and often become the object of both envy and hatred in this class. Among the women of the Black bourgeoisie, There's an intense fear of competition of white women for Negro men. They often attempt to rationalize their fear by saying that the Negro man always occupies an inferior position in relation to the white woman, or that he marries much below his social status. They come nearer to the source of their fear when they confess that there are not many eligible Negro men and that these few should marry Negro women. That such rationalizations conceal deep seated feelings of insecurity is revealed by the fact that generally they have no objection to the marriage of white men to Negro women, especially if the white man is reputed to be wealthy. In fact, they take pride in the fact and attribute these marriages to the peculiar charms of Negro women. In fact, the middle class Negro woman's fear of competition with the white woman is based upon the fact that she senses her own inadequacies and shortcomings. Her position in Negro society and in the larger Negro community is often due to some adventurous factor, such as a light complexion or a meager education, which was which has pushed her to the top of the social pyramid. The middle class white woman not only has white skin and straight hair, but she is generally more sophisticated and interesting because she has read more widely and has a larger view of the world. The middle class Negro woman may make fun of the plainness of her white competitor and the latter's lack of wealth and interest in society. Nevertheless, she still feels insecure when white women appear as even potential competitors. Both men and women among the Black bourgeoisie have a feeling of insecurity because of their constant fear of the loss of status. Since they have no status in the larger American society, the intense struggle for status among middle class Negroes is, as we have seen, an attempt to compensate for the contempt of the low self esteem of the whites. Great value is therefore placed upon all kinds of status symbols. Academic degrees, both real and honorary, are sought in order to secure status. Usually the symbols are of a material nature, implying wealth and conspicuous consumption. Sometimes Negro doctors do not attend what are supposedly scientific meetings because they do not have a Cadillac or some other expensive automobile. School teachers wear mink coats and maintain homes beyond their income for fear that they may lose status. The extravagance in social life is generally due to an effort not to lose status. But in attempting to overcome their fear of loss of status, they are often beset by new feelings of insecurity. In spite of their pretended wealth, they are aware that their incomes are insignificant and that they must struggle to maintain their mortgaged homes and the show of wealth in lavish social affairs. Moreover, they are beset with a feeling of insecurity because of their struggles to maintain a show of wealth through illegal means. From time to time, wealthy Negro doctors are arrested for selling narcotics and performing abortions. The life of many a wealthy Negro doctor is shortened by the struggle to provide diamonds, minks, and an expensive home for his wife. And an expensive home for his wife. There is much frustration among the Black bourgeoisie despite their privileged position within the segregated Negro world. Their wealth and social position cannot erase the fact that they are generally segregated and rejected by the white world. Their incomes and occupations may enable them to escape the cruder manifestations of racial prejudice, but they cannot insulate themselves against the more subtle forms of racial discrimination. These discriminations cause frustrations in Negro men because they are not allowed to play the masculine role as defined by American culture. Because even as Neely Fuller says, you can be anything but a man if you're Black. Greetings, Forecast. Thanks for tuning in. They cannot assert themselves or exercise power as white men do. When they protest against racial discrimination, there is always the threat that they will be punished by the white world. In spite of the movement toward the wider integration of the Negro into the general stream of American life, middle-class Negroes are still threatened with the loss of positions and earning power if they insist upon their rights. After the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that segregation in public education was illegal, Negro teachers in some parts of the South were dismissed because they would not sign statements supporting racial segregation in education. As one of the results of not being able to play the masculine role, middle-class Negro males have tended to cultivate their personalities, which enable them to exercise considerable influence among whites and achieve distinction in the Negro world. Among Negroes, they have been noted for their glamour. In this respect, they resemble women who use their personalities to compensate for their inferior status in relation to men, because the only man in American society can be a white man. This fact would seem to support the observation of an American sociologist that the Negro was the lady among the races if he had restricted his observation to middle-class males among American Negroes. In the South, the middle-class Negro male is not only prevented from playing a masculine role, but generally he must let Negro women assume leadership in any show of militancy. This reacts upon his status in the home, where the tradition of female dominance, which is widely established among Negroes, has tended to assign a subordinate role to the male. In fact, middle-class families, especially if the husband has risen in social status through his own efforts and married a member of an old family or a society woman, the husband is likely to play a pitiful role. The greatest compliment that can be paid such a husband is that he worships his wife, which means that he is her slave and supports her extravagances and vanities. But of course, many husbands in such positions escape from their frustrations by having extramarital sex relations. Yet the conservative and conventional middle-class husband presents a pathetic picture. He often sits at home alone, impotent physically and socially, and complains that his wife has gone crazy about poker and society and constantly demands money for gambling and expenditures which he cannot afford. Sometimes he enjoys the sympathy of a son or a daughter who has not become a socialite. Such children often say that they had a happy family until mama took to poker. Preoccupation with poker on the part of the middle-class woman is often an attempt to escape from a frustrated life. Her frustration may be bound up with her unsatisfactory sexual life. She may be married to a glamorous male who neglects her for other women. For among the Black bourgeoisie, the glamour of the male is often associated with his sexual activities. The frustration of many Negro women has a sexual origin. Even those who have sought an escape from frustration and sexual promiscuity may, because of satiety or deep psychological reasons, become obsessed with poker in order to escape from their frustrations. One society woman, in justification of her obsession with poker, remarked that it had taken the place of her former preoccupation with sex. Another said that to her that to win at poker was similar to a sexual orgasm. The frustration of the majority of the women among the Black bourgeoisie is probably due to the idle or ineffectual lives which they lead. Those who do not work devote their time to the frivolities of Negro society. When they devote their time to charity or worthwhile causes, it is generally a form of play or striving for social recognition. They are constantly forming clubs which ostensibly have a serious purpose, but in reality are formed in order to consolidate their position in society or to provide additional occasions for playing poker. The idle, overfed women among the Black bourgeoisie are generally, to use their language, dripping with diamonds. They are forever dieting and reducing only to put on more weight, which is usually the result of the food that they consume at their club meetings. Even the women among the Black bourgeoisie who work exhibit the same frustrations. Generally, they have no real interest in their work and only engage in it in order to be able to provide for the conspicuous consumption demanded by society. As we have indicated, the women, as well as the men among the Black bourgeoisie, read very little and have no interest in music, art, or theater. They are constantly restless and do not know how to relax. They are generally dull people and only become animated when social matters are discussed, especially poker games. They are afraid to be alone and constantly seek to be surrounded by their friends who enable them to escape from their boredom. The frustrated lives of the Black bourgeoisie are reflected in the attitudes of parents towards their children. Middle-class Negro families as a whole have few children. Meanwhile, among the families that constitute Negro society, there are many childless couples. One finds today, as an American observed over 40 years ago, that where the children are few, they are usually spoiled. In the middle-class Negro families, there is often not only a deep devotion to their one or two children, but a subservice to them. It is not uncommon for the only son to be called and treated as boss of the family. Parents cater to the transient wishes of their children and often rationalize their behavior towards them on the grounds that children should not be inhibited. They spend large sums of money on their children for toys and especially for their clothes. They provide their children with automobiles when they go to college. All of this is done in order that the children may maintain the status of the parents and be eligible to enter the social set in Negro colleges. When they send their children to northern white colleges, they often spend more time in preparing them for what they imagine will be their social life than in preparing them for the academic requirements of these institutions. In their fierce devotion to their children, which generally results in spoiling them, middle-class Negro parents are seemingly striving at times to establish a human relationship that will compensate for their own frustrations in the realm of human relationships. Devotion to their children often becomes the one human tie that is sincere and free from the competition and artificiality of the make believe world in which they live. Sometimes they may project upon their children their own frustrated professional ambitions, but usually, when they send their children to northern white universities as part of their social striving within the Negro community, they seem to hope that their children will have an acceptance in the white world which has been denied them. Self-hatred and guilt feelings. One of the chief frustrations of the middle class Negro, is that he has not and cannot escape identification with the Negro race and consequently is subjected to the contempt of whites. A middle class mulatto woman, a former school teacher who was fearful of the impact of this book on European readers and Southern detractors of the race, concluded her review of the original French edition in these words: "Isn't it about time our sociologists and specialists on the race problem in America began to discuss and consider the middle class Negroes as middle class Americans, or better, all U.S. Negroes as Americans? With 300 unbroken years of American tradition, way, way of life, cultural and spiritual contacts behind them, influences which have molded them as they have molded all others who are considered, even when not treated completely so, as members of the American community. Isn't it time to stop thinking of and talking about Negroes as a separate and distinct entity in the general scheme of things? And above all, isn't it time to realize that the melting pot has melted truly and fused together all the myriad, albeit conflicting, racial, cultural, educational, spiritual, and social elements which have combined in such a peculiar fashion to produce the American Negro of our time? Despite his wealth, in which he has placed so much faith as a solvent of racial discrimination, he is still subject to daily insults and excluded from participation in white American society. Middle class Negroes do not express their resentment against discrimination and insults in violent outbreaks as lower class Negroes often do. They constantly repress their hostility towards whites and seek to soothe their hurt self-esteem with all kinds of rationalizations. They may boast of their wealth and culture as compared with the condition of the poor whites. Most of them will resort to any kind of subterfuge in order to avoid contact with whites. For example, in the South, they often pay their bills by mail rather than risk unpleasant contacts with representatives of white firms. The daily repression of resentment and the constant resort to means of avoiding contacts with whites do not relieve them of their hostility towards whites. Even middle class Negroes who gain a reputation for exhibiting objectivity and a statesmanlike attitude on racial discrimination harbor deep seated hostilities towards whites. A Negro college president who has been considered such an interracial statesman once confessed to the writer that someday he was going to break loose and tell white people what he really thought. However, it is unlikely that a middle class Negro of his standing will ever break loose. Middle class Negroes generally express their aggressions against whites by using other means, such as deceiving whites and utilizing them for their own advantage. Because middle class Negroes are unable to indulge in aggressions against whites as such, they will sometimes make other minorities the object of their hostilities. For example, they may show hostility against Italians, who are also, at the time of this book, subject to discrimination. But more often, middle class Negroes, especially those who are engaged in a mad scramble to accumulate money, will direct their hostilities against Jews. They are constantly expressing their anti Semitism within Negro circles while pretending publicly to be free from prejudice. They blame the Jew for the poverty of the Negroes and for their own failures and inefficiencies in their business undertakings. In expressing their hostility towards Jews, they are attempting at the same time to identify with the white American majority. The repressed hostilities of middle class Negroes to whites are not only directed towards other minority groups, but inward toward themselves. This results in self-hatred, which may appear from their behavior to be directed toward the Negro masses, but which in reality is directed against themselves. While pretending to be proud of being a Negro, they ridicule Negroid physical characteristics and seek to modify or efface them as much as possible. Within their own group, they constantly proclaim that niggers make them sick. The very use of the term nigger, which they claim to resent, indicates that they want to disassociate themselves from the Negro masses. They talk condescendingly to Africans and of African culture, often even objecting to African sculpture in their homes. They are insulted if they are identified with Africans. They refuse to join organizations that are interested in Africa. If they are of mixed ancestry, they may boast of the fact that they have Indian ancestry. When making compliments concerning the beauty of Negroes of mixed ancestry, they generally say, for example, "She is beautiful. She looks like an Indian." On the one hand, if a Black woman has European features, they remark condescendingly, "Although she is Black, you must admit she is good looking." Some middle class Negroes of mixed ancestry like to wear Hindu costumes, while they laugh at the idea of wearing an African costume. When middle class Negroes travel, they studiously avoid association with other Negroes, especially if they themselves have received the slightest recognition by whites. Even when they cannot pass for white, they fear that they will lose this recognition if they are identified as Negroes. Therefore, nothing pleases them more than to be mistaken for Puerto Rican, Filipino, Egyptian, or Arab, or any other ethnic group other than Negro. The self-hatred of middle-class Negroes is often revealed in the keen competition which exists among them for status and recognition. This keen competition is the result of frustrations which they experience in attempting to obtain acceptance and recognition by whites. Middle-class Negroes are constantly criticizing and belittling Negroes who achieve some recognition or who acquire a status above them. They prefer to submit to the authority of whites than to be subordinate to other Negroes. For example, Negro scholars generally refuse to seek the advice and criticism of competent Negro scholars and prefer to turn to white scholars for such cooperation. In fact, it is difficult for middle-class Negroes to cooperate in any field of endeavor. This failure in social relations is, as indicated, and in an important study, because in every Negro he encounters his own self-contempt. It is as if he said, You are only a Negro like myself, so why should you be in a position above me? This self-hatred often results in guilt feelings on the part of the Negro who succeeds in elevating himself above his fellows. He feels unconsciously that in rising above other Negroes, he is committing an act of aggression which will result in hatred and revenge on their part. The act of aggression may be imagined, but often it is very real. This is the case when middle class Negroes oppose the economic and social welfare of Negroes because of their own interests. In some American cities, it has been the black bourgeoisie and not the whites who have opposed to building low-cost public housing for Negro workers. Think about when Dave Chappelle did that. In one city, two wealthy Negro doctors who have successfully opposed public housing projects for Negro workers own some of the worst slums in the United States, while their wives, who wear mink coats, drip with diamonds, and are written up in the society columns of Negro newspapers, ride in Cadillacs, their Negro tenants sleep on dirt floors of hovels unfit for human habitation. The guilt feelings of the middle class Negro are not always unconscious. For example, the case of the Negro leader who proclaimed over the radio in a national broadcast that the Negro did not want social equity, he was conscious of his guilt feelings and of his self-hatred in playing such a role. For he sent word privately to the writer that he never hated so much to do anything in his life, but that it was necessary because of his position as the head of a state college, which was under white supervision. The self-hatred of the middle-class Negro arises then not only from the fact that he does not want to be a Negro, but also because he is of his sorry role in American society. Escape into delusions. The Black bourgeoisie, as we have seen, has created a world of make-believe to shield itself from the harsh economic and social realities of American life. This world of make-believe is created out of the myth of Negro business, the reports of the Negro press on the achievements and wealth of Negroes, the recognition accorded them by whites, and the fabulous life of Negro society. Some of the middle class Negro intellectuals are not deceived by the world of make believe. They will have nothing to do with Negro society and refuse to waste their time in frivolities. They take their work seriously and live in relative obscurity so far as the Negro world is concerned. Others seek an escape from their frustrations by developing, for example, a serious interest in Negro music, which the respectable black bourgeoisie often pretends they despise. In this way, these intellectuals achieve some identification with the Negro masses and with the traditions of Negro life. But many more middle class Negroes who are satisfied to live in the world of make believe, but must find a solution to the real economic and social problems which they face, seek an escape in delusions. They seek an escape in delusions involving wealth. This is facilitated by the fact that they have had little experience with the real meaning of wealth and that they lack a tradition of saving and accumulation. Wealth to them means spending money without any reference to its source. Hence, their behavior generally reflects the worst qualities of the gentleman and peasant from whom their only vital traditions spring. Therefore, their small accumulations of capital and the income which they receive from professional services within the Negro community make them appear wealthy in comparison with the low economic status of the majority of Negroes. The delusion of wealth is supported by the myth of Negro business. Moreover, the attraction of the delusion of wealth is enhanced by the belief that wealth will gain them acceptance in American life. In seeking an escape in the delusion of wealth, middle class Negroes make a fetish of material things or physical possessions. They are constantly buying things, whether they be houses, automobiles, furniture, and all sorts of gadgets, not to mention clothes. Many of the furnishings and gadgets which they acquire are never used. Nevertheless, they continue to accumulate things. The homes of many middle-class Negroes have the appearance of museums for the exhibition of American manufactures and spurious art objects. The objects which they are constantly buying are always on display. Negro school teachers who devote their lives to society like to display 20 or 30 pairs of shoes, the majority of which they will never wear. Negro professional men proudly speak of the 2 automobiles which they have acquired when they only need one. The acquisition of objects which are not used or needed seems to be an attempt to fill some void in their lives. Greetings, Anthony McPhail. Thanks for tuning in. The delusion of power also appears to provide an escape for middle-class Negroes from the world of reality, which pierces through the world of make-believe of the Black bourgeoisie. The positions of power which they occupy in the Negro world often enable them to act autocratically towards other Negroes, especially when they have the support of the white community. In such cases, the delusion of power may provide an escape from their frustrations. It is generally, however, when middle class Negroes hold positions enabling them to participate in the white community that they seek the delusions of power and escape from their frustrations. Although their position may be only a token of the integration of the Negro into American life, they will speak and act as if they were a part of the power structure of American society. Negro advertisers who are called into counsel by whites to give advice about Negroes are especially likely to find an escape from their feelings of inferiority in the delusion of power. Negro social workers who are dependent upon white philanthropy have often gained the reputation, with the support of the Negro press, of being powerful persons in American communities. However, the majority of the Black bourgeoisie who seek an escape from their frustrations and delusions seemingly have not been able to find in the delusion of wealth or power. They have found it in magic or chance, and in sex and alcohol. Excessive drinking and sex seem to provide a means for narcoticizing the middle class Negro against a frustrating existence. A social function is hardly ever considered a success unless a goodly number of the participants pass out. But gambling, especially poker, which has become an obsession among many middle class Negroes, offers the chief escape into delusion. Among the Black bourgeoisie, it is not simply a device for winning money. It appears to be a magical device for enhancing their self-esteem through overcoming fate. Although it often involves a waste of money, which many middle-class Negroes cannot afford, it has an irresistible attraction which they often confess they cannot overcome. Despite the tinsel, glitter, and gaiety of the world of make-believe in which the middle-class Negroes take refuge, They are still beset by feelings of insecurity, frustration, and guilt. As a consequence, the free and easy life which they appear to lead is a mask for their unhappy existence. And finally, the conclusion. We're going to go a little bit past 8, but we should be out of here before 8:30. When viewed in the broad perspective of the changes which are occurring in the Western world, this study of the Black bourgeoisie reveals in an acute form many of the characteristics of modern bourgeois society, especially in the United States. Hence, it is difficult to resist the temptation to compare the Black bourgeoisie with the same class among white Americans. However, it is not the purpose of this study to isolate and analyze the common characteristics of this class in the modern world. Our task was less ambitious and therefore more restricted. Our purpose was to treat the Black bourgeoisie as a case study of a middle class group which had emerged during the changing adjustment of a racial minority to modern industrial society. From this standpoint, our study may have a broader significance than the group which we have studied. It may have some more relevance. It may have some relevance for the study of the emergence of a middle class in colonial societies, especially in African societies at present undergoing rapid changes. The characteristics of this class in the various societies will have to be studied in each case in relation to its history and the economic and social forces which are responsible for its development. The Black bourgeoisie in the United States is essentially an American phenomenon. Its emergence and its rise to importance within the Negro community are closely tied up with economic and social changes in the American community. Its behavior, as well as its mentality, is a reflection of American modes of behavior and American values. What may appear as distortions of American patterns of behavior and thought are due to the fact that the Negro lives on the margin of American society. The very existence of a separate Negro community with its own institutions within the heart of the American society is indicative of its quasi-pathological character, especially since the persistence of this separate community has been due to racial discrimination and oppression. As the result of this fact, the Black bourgeoisie is unique in a number of respects. First, it lacks a basis in the American economic system. Among colonial peoples and among other racial minorities, the bourgeoisie usually comes into existence as a result of its role in the economic organization of these societies. But the Black bourgeoisie in the United States has subsisted off the crumbs of philanthropy, the salaries of public servants, and what could be squeezed from the meager earnings of the Negro worker. Hence, Negro business, which has no significance in the American economy, has become a social myth embodying the aspirations of this class. Then, because of the position of the Negro in American life, it has been impossible for the Black bourgeoisie to play the traditional role of this class among minorities. The attempt on the part of the Communist Party to assign to the Black bourgeoisie the traditional role of this class in what the party defined as the struggle of the Negro people for national liberation only tended to emphasize the unreality of the position of the Black bourgeoisie. Moreover, the Black bourgeoisie have shown no interest in the liberation of Negroes except as it affected their own status or acceptance by the white community. They viewed with scorn the Garvey movement with its nationalistic aims. They showed practically no interest in the Negro Renaissance. They wanted to forget the Negro past, and they have attempted to conform to the behavior and values of the white community in the most minute details. Therefore, they have become, they have often become, as has been observed, exaggerated Americans. Anthony McPhail says, cultural misorientation, the greatest threat to the survival of the Black race in the 21st century by Dr. Kobe Cambone. Consideration for future book readings. I will consider that. I'll see if I can get a copy of it. Because of its struggle to gain acceptance by whites, the Black bourgeoisie has failed to play the role of a responsible elite in the Negro community. I told you we have been benignly neglected by our elite. Many individuals among the first generation of educated Negroes who were the products of missionary education had a sense of responsibility toward the Negro masses and identified themselves with the struggles of the masses to overcome the handicaps of ignorance and poverty. Their influence over the masses was limited, to be sure, not, however, because of any lack of devotion on their part, but because of the control exercised by the white community. Nevertheless, they occupied a dignified position within the Negro community and were respected as teachers of Negroes. They generally exhibited the same sincere interest in education and genuine culture as their missionary teachers. Therefore, they did not regard teaching as merely a source of income. On the other hand, today, many Negro teachers refuse identification with the Negro masses and look upon teaching primarily as a source of income. In many cases, they have nothing but contempt for their Negro pupils. Moreover, they have no real interest in education and genuine culture and spend their leisure in frivolities and in activities designed to win a place in Negro society. When the opportunity has been present, the Black bourgeoisie has exploited the Negro masses as ruthlessly as have whites. As the intellectual leaders of the Negro community, they have never dared think beyond a narrow, opportunistic philosophy that provided a rationalization for their own advantages. Although the Black bourgeoisie exercised considerable influence on the values of Negroes, they do not occupy a dignified position in the Negro community. The masses regard the Black bourgeoisie as simply those who have been lucky in getting money, which enables them to engage in conspicuous consumption. When this class pretends to present the best manners or morals of the Negro, the masses regard such claims as hypocrisy. The single factor that has dominated the mental outlook of the Black bourgeoisie has been its obsession with the struggle for status. The struggle for status has expressed itself mainly in the emphasis upon social life or society. The concern of the Negro for social life and society has been partly responsible for the failure of educated Negroes to make important contributions within the fields of science or art. Educated Negroes have been constantly subjected to the pressures of the Black bourgeoisie to conform to its values. Because of this pressure, some gifted Negroes have abandoned altogether their artistic and scientific aspirations, while others have chosen to play the role of phony intellectuals and cater to the ignorance and vanities of the Black bourgeoisie in order to secure social acceptance. Since middle class Negroes have never been permitted to play a serious role in American life, social life has offered an area of competition in which the serious affairs of life were not involved. Middle class Negroes who have made real contributions in science and art have had to escape from the influence of the social life of the Black bourgeoisie. In fact, the spirit of play or lack of serious effort has permeated every aspect of the life of the Negro community. It has therefore tended to encourage immaturity and childishness on the part of the middle class Negroes whose lives are generally devoted to trivialities. The emphasis upon social life or society is one of the main props of the world of make believe into which the Black bourgeoisie has sought an escape from its inferiority and frustrations in American society. This world of make believe, to be sure, is a reflection of the values of American society, but it lacks the economic basis that would give it roots in the world of reality. In escaping into a world of make believe, middle class Negroes have rejected both identification with the Negro and his traditional culture. Through delusions of wealth and power, they have sought identification with the white America which continues to reject them. But these delusions leave them frustrated because they are unable to escape the emptiness and futility of their existence. Gertrude Stein would have been nearer to the truth if she had said of the Black bourgeoisie what she said of Negroes in general, that they were not suffering from persecution, they were suffering from nothingness. Not because, as she explained, the African has a very ancient but a very narrow culture. The Black bourgeoisie suffers from nothingness because when Negroes attain middle class status, their lives generally lose both content and significance. So, as you can see, they feel that middle class status means nothing because it robs them of their identification with the Negro masses and it despiritualizes them. Greetings, Blanca J. Thanks for tuning in. So as you can see, the he is associating the Black bourgeoisie with the Black middle class, which I have some thoughts about that. I don't necessarily think that all middle class Blacks are the Black bourgeoisie, but I can see his point in paralleling those two groups because they have some similar values. The Black bourgeoisie feels that they are better than the average Black person. They feel like they're better than the average white person, but they've just been totally rejected by white society. And they have no way to gain entry into white society. So in every way possible, they try to emulate white society, what they know of white society. And since they often only see white people at home or in leisure, they emulate those behaviors of white society, which are the very worst attributes of the peasant and the gentleman, as the author described. So, um, that is what he had to say about the Black bourgeoisie. That the Black bourgeoisie suffers from nothingness because when Negroes attain middle class status, their lives generally lose both content and significance. So that is the end of the book. We made it, you guys. We don't have a book on deck yet. I'm going to look up this book, Cultural Misorientation, The Greatest Threat to the Survival of the Black Race. I'm going to look it up and see if I can find it. I know I don't already own it, so that won't be our next book, but I am accepting suggestions for our next book. Um, Usually I try to go older books. The forecast liked the book. Thank you very much for saying that this was a great book. Shout out to E. Franklin Frazier. Um, I think that as much as the Black bourgeoisie tried to shield their children from the reality of racism and discrimination, that those children knew that racism and discrimination existed, that they try to delude themselves and put this image out into the world that they are just as good as white people, but within themselves they feel that they are inferior to white people, because they're not being accepted by white people. So they are better than the average black person, economically and socially. That's why they create all these clubs and exclusive activities and events. But they don't yet rank into the white property classes that they aspire to associate with. My dog is getting ready to start barking, so if you guys don't have anything else to say, I want to thank Blanca, the forecast, Anthony McPhail. I know Koku is listening. I know Brother Bakari is listening. I know Sister Ron, the elders are listening. I know Bawana Haguziki is listening. I know KW Don 7 is listening. I know that the staff at the Daycare Ladies Network are listening. I know that the staff at Jesse's Kids are listening. I know that the children at the Anthony Adrian Academy are listening. And I know that you, even you, are listening. And I thank you. I appreciate each and every one of you for tuning in. And I will see you. And I will see you Monday. I will see you Monday, because I'm not coming back on this week. I have a funeral to go to. And so I will see you all Monday, July 15th, 2024. We'll see what books we can come up with. I'll post a poll. Thank you so much, Blanca. I appreciate you for catching the playback. All right, guys. I hope you all have a nice evening and stay safe, okay? Peace.